Well, we're ready to carry on where we left off yesterday. Yesterday we spoke about what in Rosicrucian terminology is called the physical world. We're spending 3 days looking at all of the spiritual worlds that are pertinent to our current evolution in the solar system. And we realized, or we saw that in the Rosicrucian philosophy, that the physical world is divided into two major subdivisions. One that we are familiar with, but we saw yesterday not very familiar at all with, and that is the chemical region, which consists of solids, liquids, and gases that we function in every day. The other part is the etheric subdivision, and whereas the chemical part of the physical world is for form, that is to experience things in definite forms, the etheric subdivision of the physical world is for the expression of life and energy and movement and action. We noted that nonetheless, even though we talked about 4 ethers that are filled with life and that are basically invisible to our normal physical perception, we noted that they were still physical in that they all responded to gravity. And so, to look at the physical world, it has 7 states: solids, liquids, gases, chemical ether, which is much like electromagnetism, life ether, the stuff of vital existence, the creator and preserver of form, light ether, for the transmission of light energy, for the stirring of the circulation of life in plants, animals, and humans. And finally, the reflecting ether, which is necessary for thought and memory when it is expressed in the physical plane. So we have a description of the most basic or the most solid of all of the worlds. We left an awful lot out of yesterday's talk, and then there's a lot that isn't in the notes, even for a very cursory beginning survey as we're doing, or exploration as we're doing. We could have noted that there are forms and organisms that pass through all of the different regions. Very much like a simple compound form such as water, we experience that as ice, and we experience it as water, and we experience it as vapor. Some things, like the life ether, we failed to mention yesterday that the life ether, as much as the chemical ether, pervades all of space. There is even evidence of that in even interstellar space, we find the residues of organic compounds of substance, such as ammonia and similar compounds that can only be produced by life ether working through an organism. We also, we can synthesize it, but it's, as it happens in nature, that's a little different. We also could have noted that the life ether, you in Southern California probably wouldn't appreciate it, but the life ether, it can be experienced right on your window pane. That is are you familiar with frost flowers? Have any of you lived in a cold enough place where, when there's moisture in the room and it's cold enough outside and you don't have thermal pane windows, frost crystals form on the windows? Well, it has been proven, and it has even been, it's an anomaly to science, but what happens is the kind of vegetation that is in a room determines what the frost flowers are going to look like. So that if you have something like a begonia plant in your room, in the water vapor that is released, remember we said there was a special connection between water and life ether. Well, if the water condenses and freezes, let me make sure that am I going here? Oh no. Oh yeah, we're all right. That if the water condenses and freezes, it makes like begonia leaves right on. And if people are smoking in the room, you'll see tobacco leaves. And they've reproduced this in semi-controlled. They don't look exactly like it, but it's close enough so that you can recognize what kind of a plant is what. So there are forms that pass through all of the different levels of the physical world. We know that electromagnetic field carries through the entire atmosphere, such that if we put up a telescope and put up a screen, we can get a little miniature sun or a little miniature star from a very distant location. That whole field will be carried, and we can even see all of the minerals that are, or all of the elements that are on that distant star or in that distant star. We can see how much iron is there. It's called spectrography. Physicists do it all the time. So we left a lot of things out. I'm very sorry for yesterday's talk. It should actually have been 2. In fact, what we're doing in 3 days' time should actually be done in 5 days' time, but we would never get even halfway through part 1 of the cosmoconception if we did that. So we're going to race through again today and continue with our little race. Now, let's try to sort of review to bring us up to where we are now. We're trying to be experiential about the statement of reality. And so we look in the world around us and we see there are forms. And we see these forms can be manipulated, that we can make things out of them, and that even the stuff of the forms, by nuclear fission or fusion, can be broken up and turned back into energy. This is provable to us. We can take matter and turn it back into energy. We also, when we look in the world around us, we find exactly what the Rosicrucian teaching describes. We find that some of the forms live. The trees right outside of the window live. And here's where the Rosicrucian teaching or the Rosicrucian philosophy separates or parts ways from most of material science. Most of material science thinks this is all chemical. However, they're not able to produce the chemical from nothing so that they can make forms that live and grow. Or as we know, much to our chagrin, that we can apply energy and we can drive the life out of these living forms so that they cease to live. In fact, that was one of the first experiences that moved me toward vegetarian. When I was a youth, I had a BB gun and I killed a bird, and the bird died in my hand. And never, ever so much in my life did I want to be able to put the life back in, and I couldn't do it. And that experience is still one of the most powerful emotional experiences I've had in my entire life, like to see the life disappear and to know that you were powerless to do anything about it. But there's a difference between some of these living forms from some of the others. Some of the living forms are not planted. They don't float in the water. They don't stick in the earth. They can jump. They can move around. and some can even fly. So some of these forms are autonomous. They have a separate existence from the physical macrocosmic body of God, at least as we see it specialized here on earth. Remember, we said that the physical body of God was wherever there was a planet, and it wasn't continuous like ours, like we consider the physical plane to be here on earth. Moreover, the forms that are autonomous and active and motile, those forms are motivated. That is, they're motivated to go someplace. That is where we're taking off with today's talk. It is extremely important to understand that independent forms, in order to be active and to exercise that activity, must have motivation. And so we're going to begin speaking about the desire world, and the desire world as the source of motivation in our being. The Rosicrucian philosophy teaches that in order to be motivated, we have to have been able to experience the stuff of motivation. And that is called desire material or desire stuff, and that comes from a totally different world than everything that we've been talking about. Until now, we've been talking about something that's completely physical. When we get to the desire world, we're talking about something that is altogether different. I'm liable to fall all over myself. Just God won't let me look too good. Never. By looking at action, we can understand motivation, and by looking at motivation, we can understand action. We can understand the motivation of action in a very simple way. Anybody who's ever studied handwriting analysis, for example, handwriting is frozen action. And therefore, if you try to understand the consciousness of someone who has written a sentence, the only way you can really do that well, other than it just being a pure intellectual exercise, is to reproduce that handwriting. And it's not an easy thing to do. To write like someone else writes, you have to use the nerves, you have to use the muscles exactly as they use them, and that means you have to feel how they felt as they were writing. My handwriting's inscrutable. No, yeah, I believe anybody can duplicate anything. It's one of those things I really believe that every time that the still small voice speaks in us, it's always brand new. It has to be brand new, because if it speaks the same way twice, you never know that it isn't a counterfeit from the adversary within ourselves. It can mimic really quickly, and when that gets to working in somebody, anybody can forge anything. That's what the quality is. If you're not a creative being, if you're not a being of light, then you become a being of counterfeiting. And because the forces that are adversarial in the cosmos and have given themselves to a life that is basically destructive and selfish, they have resigned the right to creativity, and therefore they have to become excellent counterfeiters. All right, but that's a side trip, but all right. In the same way that we realized yesterday that our physical bodies do not support our etheric bodies, but our etheric bodies suspend our physical bodies. Anytime one gets into a really strong etheric state, one realizes that we're really suspended, and levitation is not such a surprising thing at all. It's just a retransplanting of consciousness, or the association of consciousness more in the reality of the suspending medium rather than what is suspended. So what we want to look at is we want to experience a world in which energy is suspended. And this world has totally different laws, totally different principles, totally different manifestations. The desire world is still within the same potential that we have been speaking about. We said that between the absolute and the actual there was potential, and that potential was bipolar in terms of being one pole being time and the other pole being space. Even the desire world is within space and time. But the relationship to the potential of space and time is extremely, extremely different. To experience the desire world wakingly, for us, because we are so attached to this world, and we're talking about a complete awakening in the desire world, it would be totally disorienting. Because there is so much going on, and we're so subject to our desires, and we're not at all familiar with the principles and the laws as they work in the desire world, that we would really, really be lost. I had a friend that had such an experience for just a moment, and that friend said that two thoughts came to mind. The first thought was, this isn't anything like Max said it would be. And then there was a pause, a long pause, and the second thought was, how could Max say something so objective about a state or an existence that is so chaotic? So it is really quite something that kind of realization that comes of that world is very different. What we're going to do today is something much simpler. We're going to get at some of the principles and try to understand it so that we can be prepared. Truly, this is, as Shakespeare says, a world that is made of the stuff that dreams are made of. It is very much a world where everything is different. I'm even beginning to believe that this world is a lot different than we've thought it was all the time, or the way we were taught about it. The first notion that is difficult that the Rosicrucian philosophy has is that there is a stuff to our desires, our emotions, our passions. That it really is stuff. And it's even harder to believe that there are laws or principles behind our emotions. But in reality, there really is. The study of the laws of the desire world, we know it has a name. We call it psychology. Psychology means it's one of those ology words again, so it goes back to logos, the Greek word for the word of organization. So psychology is the study of the logic of the soul. That is, our existence in the desire body, in the desire world. Now, let's just start with some really simple examples to understand why things are different in the desire world than in the physical world. And there are examples that you can experience. Animals Animals function a lot in the desire world, and they function more in the desire world than they do in the physical. For about 15 years, maybe 20, my neighbors had a little tiny dog, a little teeny tiny dog. And in the course of that 15 years, I saw that little dog tangle with and chase off huge, big German shepherds. In the desire world, physical size doesn't make any difference. It's the intensity of the desire. It is the integrity of the desire. And that little dog knew that it was in the right, and it would just take out, and no other dog came on that lawn. None, ever. That little fellow really knew how to. So we're talking about a law where, a world where the intensity of desire is much more important than physical size. Let's look at it another way. If we have a room or a place that we go to that is especially intimate to us, try and visualize. Now, this is going to be an analog. This is going to be perfectly accurate and exact. But try to visualize, try to imagine in your consciousness what it would be like to see your room from the desire world. If you're looking from the desire world, all of the physical things that are in there would still be there. Most likely, we would try to see if you see something from the desire world and it looks just like this world, only everything's more vivid, you're not really seeing the desire world. You haven't let go of materialism, and you're superimposing material things onto spiritual experiences. But the physical things would be there, even in this form, though the forms would be somewhat different. That is, the things that were very dear to us would be larger. They would stand out, and they would appear much closer than other objects that we didn't take notice of or that weren't important to us. So what we're saying is that shape and size and distinguishment of objects depends on values that are emotional. See, the physical world is for physical experience. So in a physical experience, the object always stays the same size. And we learn a very great objectivity in that. But in the desire world, objects take size. They take their discrete distinguishment one from another. They're not like this at all, because in the desire world, most things flow into one another. Our moods don't have edges on them like the edge of that desk. Our moods are things that flow into each other. And so in the desire world, time and space and value are different. And what distinguishes the difference are our feelings, are our emotions, are our desires about things or about states of reality. Things that we're sentimental about would be very, very clear to us. All right, those are two little simple examples. The thing about the desire world, according to the Rosicrucian philosophy, that distinguishes it is color. There are shapes, and the shapes are meaningful, but color is what is important. And we're not talking about pigmentation. We're not talking about paints. We're not even talking about beams of light that come out of a laser light or something like that. We're talking about living color. But the color issues from or is an attribute of the nature of the emotional experience, not the other way around. The emotional experience doesn't come from the color, but the color comes from the emotional experience. Inwardly, when you are experiencing things in the desire world, You are saying that red is the color that comes before my consciousness when I experience a desire to activity or a desire to courageous assertion. So the color just is the color just sort of is like an external outer form, even though it's all internal and interpenetrating. It's hard to say it. And that the color is very much alive. And the way we understand color in the desire world is different than the way we understand color in the physical world. When we look at color in the physical world, we measure wavelength. We say how many angstroms long is this color of orange or something like that. And that's not the way it's done in the desire world. The experience of color as the attribute of emotion or feeling is experienced intuitively by perceiving or by feeling the emotion. So it is a much more direct, the heady things of measuring things by wavelength, that just doesn't exist there. You experience and you feel directly, and you rely on the intuition within you to understand what you're experiencing. Nonetheless, there are valuable things that we can garner from the physics of color to understand some things about the desire world. The physics of color the analog is not perfect for understanding the desire world, but it helps. Well, let's look at what physicists call a color sphere. Does everybody know what a color sphere is? Okay. We'll go through it very slowly. There are three attributes in physics or in painters. I don't know the terms that painters use, and they always get angry with me because I never use their terms. There is hue, saturation, and I think the term that the painters use is value. Hue is the color itself. In the color sphere, if we can imagine a sphere right before us, around the equator would be a complete rainbow. More colors than we have in the physical world, but around the equator would be all of the different colors. They're planetary in nature because the desire world is extremely astrological. And so then from hue, we understand what the nature of the emotion or what the nature of the desire is. That is to say that if someone is compassionate, that there is like a yellow-green, going around so somebody's expressing something in that segment of the equator of the color sphere as yellow-green, and that's sort of like a quality of compassion. Whereas sympathy and the ability to tune into something is something more approaching like a forest green, and so on. You can go around the whole wheel. I find those things a little silly. Because it isn't going to help us without the clairvoyance. And when we got the clairvoyance, you can just point and see that's that. You experience for yourself, and you want to have the clairvoyance with intuitive insight. And when you have the intuitive insight, you see and you know as part of the perception. So it's a little bit silly. So hue then represents the full spectrum of emotional experience. Saturation points to the intensity of the color. That is in the very center of the color sphere. Everything is completely transparent. There's no color. It's just like a crystal. There's just light, and it's completely crystal clear, no color value at all. The further you go out with the radius, it becomes thicker and thicker and thicker. And there is almost no limit to the intensity of desire or the intensity of emotion. We're deeper in, remember we were talking about the spirit-matter pole, and the more we go deeper into spirit, away from matter, the less we use extensive relations and the more we use intensive relations. So what counts in the desire world is intensity. And so there are beings that with their intensity of desire are so strong they can almost wipe out our consciousness, and so that we experience nothing but their desire, nothing but their emotion. So saturation is the intensity of the desire. Value is at the north and south pole of the color sphere. And value is usually determined in tints and shades. That is the amount of whiteness or the amount of darkness. The more you go toward the North Pole, the more whiteness that there is. The more you go toward the South Pole, the more darkness that there is. This has to do with the purity of the motivation. One can have a pure red, and in that pure red be expressing just energy as straightforward as can be. One can also express that energy to a very noble cause, and that noble cause can be expressed just as intensely, but the loving sacrifice in expressing the energy is so much stronger, and it would then come much more toward a pinkish, toward a white. On the other hand, if someone is what is almost called a black rage, that the redness would be very much interpenetrated with darkness, and it becomes more murky. So we have some idea about the quality of emotion and of desire. The analog doesn't fit perfectly, but it gives us an example of what it's like to experience things in the desire world. Because we're experiencing them all the time. We're having feelings, Most of the, really, in some ways, I feel myself that I'm a gray man. You listen to music sometime, and the composers have all of these different feelings, and they're objective about those feelings. They can put them down so that you can feel them, and they can hold them and sustain them so you can feel them. And you walk out of a concert hall or something like that where there's been live music, and you say to yourself, "Wow, that was a great experience, but I must live an awfully gray life that I don't experience that sort of thing." And the same thing is true with the nature of desire as it is in the consciousness of painters. Okay, now we have to look at the invisible side of the desire world. Because even if one is clairvoyant and can see the emotions expressed as colors and can experience them, can feel them, and intuitively know what they are, it's perfectly possible to live emotional lives and not know what the basic laws and principles, the psychology, what makes the desire world work. We're going into now what is probably one of the most valuable and practical things in the entire Rosicrucian teaching, and that is looking into the principles that work in the desire world and how they can be applied. All right? After that, I better come up with something good. You make a strong statement. Won't be the first time that I've been shamed. The Rosicrucian philosophy teaches that there are two major factors in the desire world, whether it is in the macrocosmic desire world or more particularly and practically in the microcosmic desire body. because clearly we have, or at least I have, most trouble with my desire body. It's very difficult for me to be objective about all of the things that happen and how fast they happen. The function of the desire world is to motivate, to move, and to change things. We are in this evolutionary creation to experience and to participate in a great creative work. But if we don't interact, if we don't experience, if we don't have that realization from having done something, we are counter-evolutionary. We might just as well have not come to birth from the sense of immediate experience if we're going to spend all of our time laying in bed. So the principle that in the same way that the physical world brought life in form, the desire world gives motivation to do something with that life in form. So there are forces and there are feelings are the two major factors in the desire world. Now, in the feelings are also bipolar. The feelings are very much like the spirit-matter pole that we're looking at in yesterday, today, and tomorrow. One of the forces permeates the entire desire world, and the Rosicrucian philosophy calls that attraction. It is positive, it is ubiquitous, it is pervasive in all desires. Another way of saying attraction is love. Not the emotional love, not the lofty spiritual love of Christ. We're coming to that tomorrow. But the emotion of love. This is a way of saying that love, ultimately, being the force that pervades the entire desire world, is the ultimate motivator. Everything is done because of love. Love, then, is what attracts us to all of our experiences, even if the intent is not loving. That is to say that if a fox is chasing a rabbit, the desire for that rabbit is still love. Repulsion is just a form of, inverted form of love. This we have many examples of. That is to say that when we start expressing certain kinds of emotions, or when we desire certain things, we draw ourselves to other people that have a common desire, that have a common love. Birds of a feather flock together. It shows that we're very much drawn by our love. And it doesn't depend anything on physical circumstances, not a bit. You can do it as an experiment if you want. Get involved with a certain kind of emotion, a certain kind of feeling, and tune in on it, some interest that awakens a feeling, and you will find yourself, you might turn down an alley that you never turned down before, and boom, you bump into somebody and the conversation comes up, and there you're talking to the person who has the same feelings that you have in the same way. This happens with lovers all the time. I have a friend that is mildly clairvoyant, and she drives her lovers crazy. She doesn't try to do it, but they hide in different places, or they turn up in different places, and she turns up where they never would expect it. And all she does is just tunes in on that love feeling, and boom, she's there where they're at, and they don't know what to do. They shake their heads. I remember one was a really mental guy, and he used to hang out with all sorts of people, from scientists to revolutionary politicians, and he knew all kinds of little corners in town, and he'd be with his revolutionary friends, and all at once in the door she would come, And but those sorts of things really work. This also says that the more things we love, the more things we attract to ourselves. The more we love, the more different kinds of experience we're going to have. This really says vulnerability. Love everything, boy, and you'll be attracted to everything. The opposite force, which pervades only 3 regions in the desire world, the 3 lowest regions, is called repulsion. So the 2 forces working in the desire world are attraction and repulsion. The Rosicrucian philosophy has something very insightful to say about this. It not only tells you that there is a repulsive force, but it tells you what is the origin of that repulsive force. And that is self-assertion. Clean and simple. When somebody says, I want to do things my way, or this is mine, it repulses. Very much like a dog at its bowl growling if anything comes near, it repulses. And so there is the quality, if you want to lose people, the quickest way to lose them is say, it's always got to be my way. Nobody wants to be around somebody who's always selfish. So this is the most practical thing in the whole Rosicrucian teaching. If you want to bring people to you, all you have to do is love and give. If you love and give, there's no end to the number of people that you can draw to you, no end to the number of friends that you can have, and all the kinds of experiences, opportunities that you can draw just by giving. But if you assert yourself and say, that's mine, and take or pull away, you'll repulse. And show me a person who is exceedingly self-assertive to take and say, this is mine, this is for me. I'll show you a person who's lonely. Selfish people, self-assertive people who have to have their way and who have to do things their way only are people that are selfish and lonely. The Rosicrucian philosophy, if taken in this regard, is very clear in showing that if you are selfish and self-assertive and go out and say, I want this for me, and take it for you, it's going to be counterproductive. This is why I knew a man when I lived here in the grounds that was a bartender in a brothel for Al Capone. And he was a very amazing guy. But he told me that what they say about that among the gangsters is that kind of money has no home. That what you try to pull in that selfish way isn't going to stay with you. It's going to deteriorate. It's going to be pulled away. And so the whole idea, and I'm not saying that we should not assert ourselves, but if we assert ourselves to take, there's a big difference between receiving. We can put ourselves forward in such a way that we can receive opportunities and that we can develop ourselves. But the difference is when there is a self-assertion to take and say, this is mine, that's automatically going to be driven away. There are really good examples of this, and they've been developed really well in movies. You know how it goes in the cowboy movies. The gangsters hold up the stagecoach, and they've got all the loot, and where do they have to go? They can't go where they can spend it. They immediately have to go to the lower worlds. They have to go to the Badlands, because that's the only place that they can have a hideout. And when they're in the Badlands, they start thinking to themselves, well, we've got a lot of money here, but there would be a lot more if it didn't have to be divided 4 ways, but if it could be divided 3 ways. And you see that right in the whole process, that whole consciousness leads to more and more and more destruction. In fact, this is what the function of the lowest realms of the desire world and the repulsion that works in those realms is to destroy desire forms that have outlived their time. I don't know if it's possible to destroy those forms any other way without the force of repulsion. All right, let's look at the other factor in the desire world as seen by the Rosicrucian philosophy, feeling. In this, the literature of the Rosicrucian philosophy is very, how would you say it, stingy. Feeling is not covered or described very well anywhere in any of our literature. Not at all. It is clearly implied in the Rosicrucian philosophy is how we feel is how we're going to emote. It's clear that feeling is an internalizing, that is a more sensory quality than it is an emoting quality. So that we say of people who are feelers, we say, oh, Mary feels everything. Whether Mary acts or whether Mary emotes. I don't think they make them. They only make 2 hours. And you're going to have trouble, I think, with 2 hours, because when you start copying 2-hour tapes, you have many more jams and you lose more tapes and you stretch more, because to get that much on a tape, you have they have to make it thinner. Oh, what? Don't care. Okay. As far as feeling is concerned, it is also active throughout the desire world, because one can't express something that one can't feel, but that it is primarily centered in the central region, the region of feeling in the desire world. In just a little bit, we're going to go into that in more detail. But it has to be everywhere. It's just like in the physical body. We can't make any action without there also being a sense there, so that we have some kind of feel or feedback for everything we're doing. It's like when when the lights are out, you're trying to feel your way through a room and find the light switch and such like that. You know where you are by an immediate feedback, and this is universal throughout the cosmos, that there is no expression that doesn't also have a feedback mechanism. That's a general truth of all things. I can't imagine. I think it's a basic expression of the principle of cause and consequence, and I can't imagine any creative being, including God, that would want to have a creation that had no feedback. It would be a gratuitous activity that would be purposeless and meaningless, and who'd want to do things that you can't find the results of? The Rosicrucian philosophy has a curious notion about feeling. It's really a curious one. And that is that feeling is bipolar. That there are 2 types of feeling. Now, the positive one, all of us recognize, and that is interest. And so what the Rosicrucian teaching is saying, that we cannot be motivated about something unless we're interested. First, we have to be exposed through the interest to something, and then we respond to that input of feeling by expressing some kind of motive quality, emotion or desire, motivation, or something like that. Moreover, the same thing is true here. The more things that we will be attracted to, we have to be interested in more things. That is to say that if we want to have a more full spectrum emotional nature, we were just talking before about being gray people and not really having a lot of emotions at all. If we expose ourselves or if we take interest, and this is something, we can walk around all day and not look at things. And if we don't look at things, we don't perceive what's out there. It's really good to start drawing, because when you start drawing, you look and you see what's there, and the reality comes to you. Feeling is the same way. It is volitional. You can expose yourself and become interested in things, and then when you are interested in them, you attract yourself to them in such a way that you can express emotions. Not only the number of things that we are interested in, but the intensity of our interest. If we really are interested in something and really care about it, then we can become highly motivated and highly... So again, there is a complete parity between input and output. All right, isn't that not perfect parity, but we'll come to that in a little bit. I hope we'll get the chance to do that. So this means then that if we want to be pro-evolutionary, if we want to have experience, if we want to create, if we want to do things, the big word is vulnerability. The more vulnerable we are to more experiences in the cosmos, the more reality we are going to realize, the more we're going to experience, the more we're going to be able to do. Now, the really curious thing is that the counter-feeling to interest, as stated by the Rosicrucian philosophy, is indifference. And the way it is described by seers who have a lot of experience with the feeling of indifference is something like an emotional antimatter, that it neutralizes interest, it neutralizes emotion, it neutralizes attraction. And apparently this is also voluntary, that we can voluntarily not be interested. We can express disinterest. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm childish and immature, but I don't know why anyone would want to be indifferent to anything. I think it is possible if one has a desire, a fixated desire that is self-destructive, and that nothing else can work to tame that desire, I think that there may be a valid use of practicing indifference to do that. But be careful when you that's sort of like cutting a nerve because something pains you. You lose facility in that same action. I'm not very keen about indifference, but I recognize that it is there and that it can be used. And this brings up something really interesting. It brings up one of the key differences between spiritual science and material science. Material science tries to practice indifference. They really practice negativity. They really do. Sometimes they don't practice indifference in that they do have pet theories that they would like to have it come out their way. And sometimes they even cheat. I worked for a physicist once that he was trying to find his first particle for the first time, and he wanted to show a little blip in his statistics, and sure enough, a little blip showed up in there, and then there was a little footnote way in the bottom that says, the bins in this histogram overlap. Meaning to say he was counting the same thing at least twice, just to show that there was something there. But the Rosicrucian philosophy of science is you don't practice indifference. You practice interest. Moreover, you practice interest with attraction. You believe that all things are true until they prove themselves false. See, because if you're going to find the truth of something, it's much better to be attracted to it, and that can only happen if you're interested and you believe it so. You have to be just as rigorous about the proof, but you're much more likely to find what you want. You know, like it's sort of like the analogy. Suppose you lose your keys somewhere. What happens? You get that. If you start believing that you don't know where the keys are, you have that chaotic feeling. You're at sea. You don't know where they are. But if you think found, if you think how it's going to be like just at that moment you find them, you attract yourself to them. There's a lot of psychology. A lot of pop psychology is based on this, unfortunately, in a very shallow way. But there is a lot of very good psychology in being interested and believing something is true, because that will bring you to the truth that you want to get to. All right. All right, let's work in a little bit more detailed. Let's look at the basic experiences we have in the desire world, and then start looking at the different regions of the desire world, and we'll look a little bit at the aura, because this is, after all, a talk on what is an aura, though we never seem to get to it. Emotions. Emotions are the outpouring of love in one flavor or another. But as the emotions go in the desire world, they don't have to be motivational about things in this world. That is, one doesn't have to have the desire to want to polish the top of that desk. One can have emotions about things that are completely in the desire world. Poets are like that. There are people that become very emotive. They live in a world of emotions all alone. They just pour out emotions, and there's a logic to it, and it's very beautiful. You see things among poets that they take you into a very rare place, and it has very few touching points with things in the external world. Coming a little deeper in the desire world are things like fantasies. Fantasies are somewhere between emotions and desires. And that's roughly speaking. This is not total fantasy as in the psychological sense. And that is, there is interest and there is attraction to something, but there isn't the sacrifice or the artistic quality that leads to a higher emotion. A fantasy is a special little place that doesn't motivate you to do anything, and it doesn't motivate you to something higher. Fantasies very rarely come to fruit. Proceeding a little deeper in the desire world are desires. They are emotions that aren't just about emotions. They aren't just experiences given and taken. They are emotions that are about things. Things that we want to give to, or things we want to take from. Clearly, when the desires become intense to the point that they're almost out of control, they become passions. A passion is, and any emotion or any desire can become a passion when it reaches a certain level of intensity. It seems to go into an overdrive that is all of its own. Love is even that. If we take from the highest level of the desire world, we have what is described as the passion play of Christ. That the feelings were of Christ in the sacrifice and pouring out of love in the crucifixion, and ever since then, that is a passion. The Rosicrucian philosophy also speaks of destructive passions. Those are where the element of self-assertion and the self-taking, selfishness, is so much that the destructive element comes in and that the repulsion is there, And we all know what happens with people like that. It's quite a destructive thing. There are all kinds of states of emotion and desire and such like that, but we really don't have time to go into them. Now let's take a brief exploratory trip through the different regions of the desire world. Again, there are 7 regions of the desire world, just as there are 7 regions of the physical world. There are deep philosophical reasons why there are 7s, but we don't. It would take me at least 45 minutes to get to why there are 7s, and I'd have to work very hard to even do it in 45 minutes, but we'll just say that there are. Normally, it is the tradition in the Rosicrucian philosophy, as in other philosophies, one doesn't enter the desire world from either the bottom or the top. One enters in the center. That is in the region of feeling. This is the center. But in the desire world, we're used to thinking when we thought about a color sphere, when we had our color sphere here before, we could see where that center was. In the desire world, it isn't a matter of space. It is a matter of neutrality. Neutrality between interest and indifference, and between attraction and repulsion. So the central part of our desire emotional experience is called the region of feeling. Now this is a really important conception that the Rosicrucian philosophy has here. The Rosicrucian philosophy implies that there is in your emotional nature a center that you can get to, that you can, I don't know how you feel things in such a way that you can feel what is attractive about them, what is repulsive about them, and that you can know in a completely neutral way, without being motivated to do something, without being motivated to shrink away, or to even turn it off. So this is, in terms of experience and in terms of perception, if we want to feel what someone or what some experience is like, that is a very possible thing to do. That by our exercises we can put ourselves into a place that we can just feel. Wonderful thing, a great conception. So there is attraction in this realm, but it is not active attraction. It's more like proactive. It isn't even enthusiastic. Enthusiasm in Rosicrucian terms has very special meanings, especially if you've ever read the story of Zanoni by Edward Bulwer-Lytton, which is a study in enthusiasm. It's very beautiful, and unless you go back to the title line, A Study in Enthusiasm, you'll miss the whole book. But at any rate, everything in the desire world begins with interest. All right, now let's go to the bottom. The lowest region is the region of coarse, sensual, and passional desires. This is the region where there are intense desires, but they are intensely repulsive because of the selfish self-assertion. And I think these desires, even though there's the repulsion, they don't break down easily because of the intensity of the desire, because the intensity is the all in the desire world. They don't break down easily. That you can tell by looking at vengeance. Whoa, vengeance will last for years. Most things in the desire world last for a long time. Any psychiatrist can tell you that given the right circumstance, a desire form that you've had in your soul for a long time that seems to be all gone, suddenly it'll pop back up again and it'll be as live as ever. So the things like grudges, for example, People who hold a grudge, in some ways, the expression of an intense desire tires it out. It's sometimes good if you know that somebody is simmering with anger. It's sometimes good to provoke them to get it out, even though you may get punched, because at least they're not going to destroy themselves. Because if you allow that to simmer deep down inside, you can destroy yourself with that thing, that kind of emotion. It is internally very, very intensely destructive. For every region or every sub-region of the desire world, there are people that characterize it. There are people who love focusing on the negative. There are people who like to be spoilers. We've all met spoilers. They're all with that lovely repulsion. They love to just come in and just break things up. Now, the way the repulsive desires work, as seen by the Rosicrucian philosophy, is very lovely, because there is enough attraction to bring things together, but when they're brought together, then the repulsion tears them apart. Now, behind everything we experience in the physical world, there has to have been some desire. So if somebody tells a lie, the emotion behind that lie will be that desire form will be attracted to the real. And then the repulsive quality in the lie will destroy the truth. This is why the Rosicrucian philosophy claims that a lie is a murder and a suicide, because it kills itself. And this is why in extremely this gets played out, and unfortunately it's been getting played out since there's a lot of capital punishment. It's getting played out much more frequently. We find more and more of these people that are functioning in the lower desire world that have to have things their own way. You're staying with me, baby, no matter what. And if you don't, what happens? They carry that principle out as a living reality. They murder, and then they suicide. It's like saying that the events that occur in life, in the drama of life, are the playing out of principles that are laws that are right within the logic or the nature of the desire world itself. It's a very important principle that if you start intentionally associating with the negative, you're going to really mess things up. This is also what's behind the statement, there is no honor among thieves. That is to say that when there is that kind of a thing, I want it for me. Also, what is really beautiful about the Rosicrucian teaching with regard to this, it's saying then that the base desires, the passional coarse desires, like anger, are definitely the result of self-assertion. I find that almost every time I get angry, it's because I don't get my way. You know, and if you have to get it your way, you're going to have a lot of anger. Oh boy. We have mentioned before that there is a purpose for this destructiveness, and the Rosicrucian philosophy gives a beautiful example of the positivity of even the destructiveness, because there is attraction in the lower desire world, and that is flowers. Flowers put themselves out there, and so that you pick them. The desire leads to an attraction to, if there's a destructive desire, I want that flower to myself. But the attraction holds through in such a way that when you see something beautiful like that die, whether you're consciously aware of it or not, it is bringing the attractive love to you, and that even in its destruction, there is a tremendous sacrifice that in the long term has an edifying effect upon the person who selfishly went out there and cut the flower, which works that way even if the flower was cut to present to somebody who's in a hospital bed withering away or something like that. It's a really beautiful way that the things that we do every day in life are having powerful psychic and spiritual effects on us, and we don't even know it. It won't be too long. We're in page 5 of 7 pages of notes. The next region up from the region of coarse passional desires is the region of impressionability. And the region of impressionability is where the forces of attraction and repulsion are equal to each other, roughly. And this is exactly what makes for an impression. Like after we die, we're going to talk about this next week, after we die, our desire body, which is normally an aura, approximates the shape of our physical existence when we were in the body. That is because when we see the pictures of our past life, we build the essence of the physical and etheric bodies as impressions into the desire body. And if you look at it, this is sort of like on the philosophy of aestheticism or the philosophy of beauty. If you think of what an impression is, an impression has an element of style. I'm talking about musical art or artistic impressionism. It has an element of style, which is its assertion. But it also has an element of attraction, which is sort of like its integrity. And so that, anything that is going to be a memory has to be able to receive and hold together a form, but it can't be so hard that it can't be impressionable, but it can't be so flaccid that it just falls apart. And so in the desire world, where there is that perfect balance between attraction and repulsion, is where one finds impressions. And if you look at an impression that is left in you, the very kind of thing that impressionist painters put in their paintings, there's a style, there's an assertion there, but there's also something that's held together. It's somewhere in between a discrete form and how would you say it, an indefinite sort of floating around, amorphous kind of state. And so the Rosicrucian philosophy, I'm starting to speed up because we've got 15 minutes left and that's it. The Rosicrucian philosophy talks about the region of impressions having that quality. The next region up is called the region of wishes. Here it is predominantly attraction, but there is a little bit of repulsion. And the way this works is that the attraction is not really in an assertive state, but the repulsion isn't enough so that it can really mess things up. There's more attraction, so there is more drawing things together than there is repulsion. And so this is the region where the fantasies, where the daydreams, and where the wishes exist. So this is called the region of wishes. And you can idle away your entire life in daydreams or fantasies or things like that. But it is possible if you are something like let me lay back and dream all day, that can be changed. It can go either way. You hear about it. Sometimes events in life do it. Sometimes a person is a dreamer and suddenly they hit the lotto. Within a year's time, because they were only dreamers, they put it all down into the lower desire world and they're broke and they've lost their mate and everything else because they have allowed that little bit of force of repulsion to take root and to really destroy their whole life. On the other hand, sometimes dreamers become artists. And that brings us to the next world, which is the fifth region. We'll skip the region of feeling because we've already been there, and that is the region of soul life. Now, we don't have time to talk about why the name is given the region of soul life, because that's almost a talk in itself. In the region of soul life, attraction holds full sway. But the attraction is not so much that it is the pure light that is behind the desires, but that the colors are there. So this is the realm of art, or the realm of not only painting, but any art where there is tone quality, where there is color quality. So there is the whole quality of attraction by giving. You can't be an artist and not give. There is the quality of giving, but giving hasn't gone so far that the flavors of feeling are lost. The next region up is the region of soul light. Here, the attraction is so strong and so active that the light pervades or prevails over the color. That is to say that love is more important than distinct emotions. And this is what leads to altruism. Altruism is when you recognize the universal love that pervades through the different feelings. The character or the feeling of this realm is romance. Not boy-girl romance. That pins back down the other direction. But we're talking about the romance of poetry and of mythology and of things like that, where one senses the greatness beyond all, beyond the forms. So altruism then is a desire or an emotion where one is attracted in love to the common love that is shared by everyone. The Rosicrucian philosophy says that it goes further than that to the highest region of the desire world, and the highest region of the desire world is called the region of soul power. Very, very few people ever experience this. When Christ was living in the body of Jesus during the 3 years missionary, it instituted 2 new commandments. Love thy neighbor as thyself, which is altruism, and which is also much stronger than do unto others as you would have others do unto you, because that can be pretty selfish. But if you love thy neighbor as thyself, you're loving from that region of selfhood or beyond selfhood. The second commandment that was instituted by Christ Jesus was love thy God with all thy heart, all thy mind, basically with all thy being. What happened then is that Christ lived what he preached. He sacrificed and he gave love even unto death. It is the ultimate of desires. It is the ultimate of attraction, that there is a giving where there is a complete sacrifice, a sacrifice unto death that wins everything. That is, it's winning by losing. That if you give love to the ultimate, then everything comes back to you. And it's also clean, because if you're that sacrificial, there's not egoism in the activity. So this is why the highest region of the desire world is called the region of philanthropy, which means the love of humanity and humanity as a whole, so that there is loving, ultimate love to sacrifice. All of the higher regions of the desire world have some of this quality in it. Every artist has a great deal of sacrifice. They'll sacrifice anything and everything for the sake of their art. But when it gets to the level of philanthropy, even the need to express self is foregone for the whole. The macrocosmic desire world is like the three-dimensional world of the ethers and the physical. The macrocosmic desire body is also found surrounding the planets. But things go into inner dimensions and come out. That is to say, let's say something first about the desire world in macrocosm. It is sometimes called by some people the astral world. The reason for this is twofold. One, because the light really is luminescent and it really is twinkly like star stuff. The second reason is that this is where the astrological forces work. You're never going to find it in electromagnetism and all of the astrologers that are trying to bend physics to work for them. It isn't going to work that way because it's in the desire world. It's in the astral world. In the desire world, each of the planets is a specialist. There are the sounding boards deep, deep into creativity in the bodies of the hierarchies themselves, into constellations. And coming closer to home, the sounding board of the signs of the zodiac. But the notes or the focusing agencies are the planets. But the planets specialize. And each planet specializes in a particular desire. And each one is like the macrocosmic desire world is something that color is perpetually being poured into a sea of light in color in different proportions. And so that there are seasons of feelings that sometimes it feels this way, sometimes it feels that way. Sometimes even humans start currents in the desire world. I can remember I was in the shipping department here when Jack Kennedy was assassinated. For 2 or 3 days. It would be just, like when you walk over, the place where the homeless sleep, where the heat comes out of the grates like that, you walk along and you feel a current of warm air. And the whole desire world was like that. Like you'd be walking along and suddenly there'd be like a whole current of feeling of sympathy for Jack Kennedy would just come flowing in on you. But this is actually happening all the time in the desire world if we become sensitive enough. There are seasons where there are pools and streams of different kinds of emotions. They make themselves manifest in the different kinds of fads that take place in society, but the desire world is like that. The macrocosm, remember again, we build our desire bodies both before we come to birth, but day by day by day, by taking what is available to us out of the desire world. It's a wonderful exercise to exercise the realm of feeling and to set the ephemeris down before you and look at what's right by the aspects or what is right by the planets in different positions and feel what is there. What kind of potentiality of character can be developed out of this combination? Because, it's an awfully indirect way to do it if you have to look at a book of numbers in order to determine which way you should direct your feelings. But if I don't care if it's indirect, it's still at least some way getting you toward the kind of experience where you can feel what is necessary to be felt. That's somewhat what the nature of the desire world is like. They say there are things about the 60s and the 70s and generational qualities, and those things are true. There are seasons, and like it or not, we're going to be led one way or another. Now, one thing we haven't talked about, and we may not talk about in this whole series of talks, because this whole series of talks should be 15 talks instead of 10, and we haven't talked about all of the beings besides humans, animals, plants, and minerals. Because there are all kinds of entities and things like that. Because the big thing about the desire world is we're always looking through our own aura. Aha, we finally got to the aura. Or almost. We almost got there. We have a little bit to look at yet. While we're looking at planets, there are 3 planets that are especially important to the desire world, and they are the Moon, Venus, and Mars. We're using the old way of expressing Mars. We're going to look at that in just a second. The reason for this is that our desire bodies were built in an ancient period of time called the Moon period. And so the fundamental quality of feeling, as anybody who can tell you has ever lived with somebody that has a lot of stuff in cancer, that cancer represents the basic feelability. It's like their whole bodies are antennae. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a cancer, and he went and lived for a while with David Hume, who was anything but a cancer. He was sort of a tough old Scotch philosopher, and he was very kind to Rousseau, and Rousseau backbit him. But what Hume said about Rousseau is true of all Cancerian consciousness. He said Rousseau was like a man that was skinned and put out into the world. He had that ultimate kind of sensitivity. And so the moon represents the desire body, the general desire body, the feelability, and the basic emotions to take care, the instincts. The Mars rules Aries and Scorpio. And 2 keywords. The key word for Aries is self-assertion. And the key word for Scorpio is repulsion. Therefore, the force of self-assertion and repulsion in the lower desire world is ruled by Mars. Venus rules Taurus and Libra. And in Taurus, the key word is attraction, and the key word for Libra is love of the other. So the attractive quality, the loving quality that pervades the higher part of the desire world and that is associated with the force of attraction is associated with Venus. The symbol for the Earth is a circle with a square in. And the way it works is actually that the desire bodies of Earth, that the desire body of Earth interpenetrates with the desire bodies of Mars and Venus. And that is to say, the push-pull relationship that we have for formal experience and the health that gives us in our emotional being is symbolized by an ancient alchemical Rosicrucian symbol that looks like this. It's still done in some Rosicrucian healing work. Just bring that up for the people that want something to think on. But it's 3 circles together with a cross in between them. Below is Mars, above is Venus, and it has to do with the healing process that comes from being attracted and repulsed to concrete experience. All right. Finally, we get to what is an aura, and the aura is the desire world aura is our sum of experience of the desire world. It is seen with 3-dimensional consciousness, which again has the material objectivity, which is both good and bad, superimposed on us, but it's seen as about up to 18 inches surrounding the physical body. It is an ellipsoid. That means to say it is egg-shaped. And usually the perfect circle or the perfect sphere represents spiritual perfection, whereas the line indicates material delineation for new experience, and the Ovid, like the egg shape of the desire body, is a combination. It's a delineated sphere, meaning that it is in that shape to promote new evolution and new experience. The real thing about the desire world or about the desire body is what emotions, what feelings, what desires it is made up of. And that is what have we exposed ourselves to? What have we done with it? Now the thing is, there are counterparts between the inner experience of desire and the outer form. And one of the very big things about the desire body is the principle of projection. Again, to look into the desire world, we look through our desire body, just as we look to the physical world, we look through the physical body. And there are imperfections in our sensory abilities. There are also imperfections in our desire nature. That is to say, it's an old statement, somebody is always looking through their own aura. That is projection. See, desires, if we don't discharge them by retrospection or a similar exercise, desires tend to accumulate. And so when the ancient people said somebody was possessed by this demonic being, they were right. But when somebody like Carl Jung says somebody has a constellation or a complex of thoughts and emotions that they always go through, they're right. One is talking about the form, and the other is talking about the meaning or about the inner experience of it. And so anytime we perceive through our own emotional nature, if we're insecure, we see our insecurities in someone else. This is why it is absolutely necessary to purify ourselves in order to be able to do anything, especially if we want to do help work to help other people. Because otherwise we're going to project our own stuff onto them, and we may not be helping them with what they're doing. This is why retrospection is such a valuable, practical thing for us to do. We also have to purify ourselves so that when we feel an emotion, we feel that emotion and not some murky expression of it. Now, the desire body is very young in evolution, and it has 7 areas in it that are like sense areas. They are located in the knees, one in each knee, that as you see it in the physical circumstance, when you're looking at it, things in the inner desire world, completely apart from the physical, it is as to what the planetary ruler of that vortex is. And the dimensionality and time take a different meaning in the desire world. So the knees and in the groin area, from the sacroiliac to the genitals, at the liver, at the throat, at the back of the head, at the base of the skull, and in the center of the forehead. The desires within us change rapidly, much more rapidly than a piece of music. If you see a person who's really sensitive, you can see dozens of expressions go across their face in a second's time, and that's only in the physical. In the desire world, many, many emotions go rapid fire. You know, as fast as your thoughts go, you go through a whole stream of emotions, and it's really quite something.